Well, I've encouraged it to reassume its correct shape. That took an awful lot of hitting. Now that damage didn't happen casually. It wasn't a case where somebody between finger and thumb just did up the nut a little bit tight on the tripod. They would have had to put a good deal of force into that process in order to distort the aluminium section as much as that. There was every opportunity for them to be aware that they were creating a problem, but they didn't. Anyway, that's good. That's back where it should have been. Next I want to start putting the levers back in the camera body, and the lock lever and the release lever are next to go in. And of course our release lever has a return spring, which I took off while I was cleaning things. So I'll discover where I've hidden the return spring. There it is. And look at the state of that to make sure that it's not bent in an inappropriate shape. Looks pretty good. A bit of a twist on it here. Deal with that. That should be fine. Now to get the spring on is always entertaining. It's a bit awkward. You slide the hook of this over the side of the arm and get the loop over the stud on the top all at the same time. Of course it doesn't want to go because it's not quite the same shape, but it can be made to go. Yeah, it's on. Just checking that it folds around there neatly. If it doesn't fold around that stud neatly, it'll want to pull off. That looks good. Molybdenum paste in the holes in the body casting, here and here and there where the stud end of the lock lever fits, and a wipe along this front edge where that return spring for the release lever runs. And at the top here, our release lever here and our lock lever here. We'll put the lock lever in first. That's not enthusiastic at going in there. Why is that? No, it's in there now. Must have been a bit of grit or something there. It's happy now. So its return spring is the lighter of the two springs that look like that, and it is held in place with a C-clip or E-clip. So I'll hold that, I'll hold the lever in place with my finger from below, I'll hold the spring depressed with my thumb from above, pick up my clip in the tweezers, offer it up to the slot in the shaft there, and press it into place with the back of my tweezers. That's it, clicks into place. That's good. There's a little speck of grit there, I'll lift that out while I'm here. And the release lever goes in the hole towards the front, comes up through the body. At this point, make sure I don't damage that spring while I'm fitting it. And the heavier of the two springs goes on the top of the shaft, and that's held in place with a single screw broad head, shoulder at the top towards the top of the screw that supports the top of the spring, and that runs down into the shaft of the release lever. It should be a relatively snug fit, and that's that done. The film advance shaft needs to go in next, along with its bush to the bottom of the film take-up spool, and we'll want 3 screws for that, which are nickel plated and will have no glue on them because they were never glued. Those 3 will do nicely. Now this shaft, I'm interested in a number of things here. I want to see if it's bent at all. Sometimes they're bent, particularly down at the end here, if the camera's been bashed on the ground and the film advance lever has taken the brunt of it. Sometimes they're loose. They're crimped on or riveted onto the end of the shaft at this point. Again, if it's hit the ground or suffered abuse, sometimes they're loose. And there's a bit of rattle there, but there's none in this case, that's all good. So I want some graphite grease for this. I can see it in front of me. Pull back that spring slightly and get some grease up above here. Now I can see that there's a groove in the shaft right at the base there. That means that the last wind of the spring has been twisted into that. Over time it's worn a groove. That's an undesirable thing, but there's not much you can do about it, unfortunately. You can avoid it. You can avoid it happening in the first place if the parts are well lubricated, free from any grit which would act like a grinding compound, and if the return spring is not over tensioned. It's where the return spring is over tensioned, then the spring is being wound tight. If it's been wound very tight, that last coil will basically be getting twisted firmly into the brass shaft on each time it's moved. That's moving nicely now, that's moving very freely. And I want to put some synthetic grease on these ratchet positions here, top and bottom. There are 2 ratchets on here, one for allowing the film advance to move in one direction and one the other. Our take-up spool has been cleaned. That's just plastic, of course, but it has this metal bush goes in the bottom. Open the back of the camera, drop that into place in the where the spool goes, and I should be able to feed my film advance shaft in from the top. I'm just checking this is sitting correctly. The spring's tucked down, nothing's in the out of position. That's good, so I can drop that into the body well there. Swing that round to where the rest position is here. Swing my release lever out of the way so it's not fouling it up. Drop my lock lever down so it holds it in place. And here I have everything lined up for my 3 screws. And that's sitting in the relaxed position at that point. I will be giving that one full turn of tension on the film advance shaft before the lever and things are fitted, so that it has a one full turn of tension will provide sufficient power to swing the advance lever back to the rest position without any problems. You can adjust the amount of tension you've got in 1/3 of a turns by just shifting the attachment plate here on the body if required. Generally you don't need to, not with a rangefinder camera like this. With the reflexes models, there's sufficient other parts there creating friction that it's sometimes useful to have an extra third of a turn of tension. And even the Retina 3S the same. There's enough going on that it's worth having a bit of extra tension. For these ones, 1 turn of pre-tension is ideal. At the top of the camera, I need to assemble the clutch, and the clutch is 3 pieces. And I'll lubricate this with some graphite grease again because I like the way it feels. I lubricate this by putting my graphite grease on the inside of the outer component of the clutch. That's where the spring is going to run, the tensioning spring. Doesn't hurt to have a little bit on that recess there. Now, where are the pliers? So the spring goes on the centre piece, and there's a little notch in it that the tab on the spring falls into. That locates it. Normally I grab it with my crimp lug pliers, squeeze them very gently, and rotate this with finger and thumb, which pulls that spring in as it goes. Put the outer component over the top and just push it into place. So there's a clutch assembly. It moves smoothly in one direction, not so smoothly in the other. Fortunately, the smooth direction is the correct direction, so it doesn't matter. Put some synthetic grease through the centre of that, drop it into place on top of the film advance shaft, rotate it until it falls into place. It's engaged the top of the take-up spool. Here's the bush that holds the film advance shaft in position at the top of the camera. And there's no lubrication in here in this gear at the moment. There's 2 little pinions there linked together on a common shaft, and they're dry because it's all been through the degreaser and cleaner and so forth. So I've forced a bit of grease in there. This drops in from the top. It's useful to roll the take-up spool with your thumb, which turns the gear on the clutch at the same time, which engages with this wheel down here, and then everything falls into place. The screws for this. We have this one on this side, a shoulder screw that acts as a support for the top of the shutter cocking rack. And on the other side, there's a shoulder screw that holds the little ratchet pawl in there, which prevents the winding mechanism moving backwards. So that goes on there like that. That bush goes plain side up, the countersunk side goes down. There's that little ratchet. And the screw, the shoulder screw that goes through that is here. And I'll just put a tiny touch of grease to that shoulder at the top of that screw where it runs through that little ratchet pawl, so that the ratchet pawl will be able to move freely. That looks good. Those 2 screws, I'm not going to do them right up tight at the moment. I've got reasons for not wanting to do that, which I'll explain shortly. As long as they're snug, that's good. Now there's a return spring, a little spring that goes on the top of that ratchet pawl. We want that in place. That sits around a recess in the top of that screw head. and that acts against that pawl to pull it in towards the centre. Now I will just pop that under there for the moment. I've got to start assembling this shutter film advanced shaft stuff at the top. And the gear goes on there. So I'll apply a bit of synthetic grease to the inside edge of that and the centre. Rotate that anti-clockwise into position. And you could hear that pawl, that ratchet working. There's the other parts. Just gathering all the pieces that go in here. Now that gear, I'll have a close look at that. I think that'll be fine. The rack wasn't damaged at this point. At the top end, it was damaged at the bottom end, so this gear should be fine and it appears to be good. So this little leaf spring arrangement here, I usually give that a wipe of grease, not because it needs to be lubricated, but to make sure that it doesn't suffer from corrosion. That goes on there. This drive dog goes on there. On top of that drive dog we have a plain washer. On top of the plain washer we have the gear. That's seated correctly. And then there's a single screw with a couple of notches out the side of it to engage a spanner. Sits on the top, and I'll just run that down, making sure that the gear doesn't shift on that squared shaft while I'm doing so. Yeah, that's good. So that's all coupled up. Next, have I got anything loose in here? No. No, I can't get into any trouble. That's all looking good. Where's my block of wood to work on? There it is. Right, here we go. Is that camera going to focus? It's thinking about it. Yeah, it's getting there. The latch lever for the rewind button needs to go in next, along with its return spring and screw. Shoulder screw. Here we are, we're in business. So, the latch lever is this little bit, and the rounded end of it here is activated by studs on the base of the film advance lever. It hooks under there like that. Let's get it in place. It's better. Its return spring sits there, and it's held in place with a shoulder screw. Two shoulders on there, one for the lever to revolve around and one for the spring to be able to revolve around. So you have to make sure that you've got it all nice, that the lever is free to move once you've got that screw tightened down. Just check that there's no problem there, that's all good. And now I've got to hook that spring behind this tab on the arm. So, I've got to find a stronger pair of tweezers. amazing how you can lose so much gear in a small space. I'll make do with what I've got. So I'll lift the end of that spring up and tuck it behind there. So that's now sprung loaded. That went exceptionally smoothly, suspiciously so. The shaft for the sprocket shaft, here's our sprocket here. It goes slotted side up into the back of the body. The shaft, I usually lubricate a bit of synthetic grease at the base, some up here at the top, and usually I'll put a wipe on the gear. Doesn't need much there. That slides down here, and that's why I didn't tighten up these two screws yet, because if you tighten them up you may find you have trouble getting this to slide down past that gear. That looks good. Flip it over, swing that lever back to allow that arm to pass through, and there it is, it's all sitting in place. Now there's a screw that goes through here and drives the sprocket from the sprocket shaft. That can go in place now. There are 3 screws that are identical. 2 of them hold the door hinge in place. One of them does this piece. Let's make sure I've got them. I know I've got 2 of them. One of them's missing, isn't it? Yeah, I've got to replace one of them because it was an incorrect screw had been used. That screw done up. And the rewind button can go on next. So I'll need its return spring, its washer, and the button itself. So normally here I apply some synthetic grease to the spring. Put that on the button. Put the washer on the button. And holding the shaft in from the top with my finger, run the button, screw the button into the base of the sprocket shaft, checking that it's actually free to move, that the button has passed through the washer. That seems good. It's a bit tight on the threads. I'll need the pliers to do that up tight.